The great hall of the Zephyrian High Council trembled as another explosion echoed through space. Admiral Kexthara stood before the massive viewing screen that showed their dying fleet. Ships that had taken decades to build were now twisted metal, floating in the void. The blue glow of Zephyrian energy weapons flickered and died as one by one their vessels went dark. "How many ships have we lost today?" asked Elder Vexmar, his crystal-like skin reflecting the red warning lights that bathed the chamber. 47 vessels, Elder," replied Admiral Kexthara, his voice heavy with defeat. "The Vorthak bioships adapted to our plasma cannons within hours. They consumed the energy and grew stronger. The Vorthak were unlike any enemy the galaxy had ever seen. Their ships were not built but grown, living creatures the size of small moons that could heal damage by eating destroyed vessels. What made them truly terrifying was their ability to learn. Every weapon used against them became useless after the first few attacks. Intelligence Officer Yelena moved her tentacles nervously as she approached the council. Her species had evolved from sea creatures, and when stressed, her skin changed colors like an ancient earth octopus. Right now she was a deep purple that meant pure fear. "Elders, I have the latest reports from the outer colonies," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Vorthak have consumed the entire Altair system, 12 billion lives gone. They're moving toward the core worlds now." Elder Vexmar closed his many eyes. The Altarians had been their oldest allies. Their crystal cities had stood for 10,000 years, and now they were nothing but fuel for the Vorthak war machine. "What about the Centauri Federation?" asked another council member. "Surely they will help us now that the threat is clear." Admiral Kexthara shook his head. "The Federation fell last week. Their entire battle fleet was destroyed at the Battle of Proxima. The survivors sent one message before going silent: the bugs are too many. Save yourselves." The chamber fell into a terrible silence. For 300 years, the Zephyrian Republic had been the strongest military force in this part of the galaxy. Their energy weapons could crack planets, and their shields could stop any known attack. But the Vorthak were not using known attacks. They were using something far worse: evolution. "There must be someone," said Elder Vexmar. "Some species we haven't contacted yet. What about the Outer Rim territories?" Anilinth's tentacles moved faster, a sign she was thinking hard. "Most of the Outer Rim species are too primitive to help. The Draconian Empire refuses to get involved. They say the Vorthak will never reach their territory. The Aquarian Collective is too far away to arrive in time." "Then we're finished," said Admiral Kexthara. "My ships can't fight an enemy that grows stronger every time we attack it. We need a new kind of warfare, something the Vorthak have never seen before." That's when Yelena remembered something strange from a recent scouting report. "Wait," she said, her skin changing to a lighter blue. "There is one species. They're very far from here, in what they call the Sol system. The third planet from their star." "What makes them special?" asked Elder Vexmar. "According to our scouts, they call themselves humans. They're unusual. Most species in the galaxy fight for territory, resources, or survival. These humans fight for ideas. They have something called war that they practice against each other." Admiral Kexthara's compound eyes widened. "They fight their own species?" "Regularly," Yelena confirmed. "Our scouts observed 17 different conflicts happening on their planet at the same time. But here's the strange part. They also have something called peace, where they stop fighting and help each other. Then they start fighting again over new ideas." "That makes no sense," said Elder Vexmar. "Why would a species waste energy fighting itself?" "The scouts think it might be how they test new ways of fighting. They seem to enjoy creating new weapons and tactics. In their history, they've developed hundreds of different ways to destroy things." Admiral Kexthara felt something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. Are they advanced enough to help us? That's the strange part. Their technology is much simpler than ours, but they use it in ways we never thought of. Our scouts watch them take a simple explosive device and use it to stop a much larger force by thinking in ways the enemy didn't expect. The council members looked at each other. The idea of asking for help from a primitive species was embarrassing, but they were running out of options. Another explosion shook the chamber as more Vorthic bioships attacked their defensive platforms. What kind of military do they have? Asked Admiral Kext, HARA.Y, Neth, consulted her datapad. They divide their military into different groups that specialize in different environments. They have armies for land, navies for water, and air forces for their sky. But the interesting part is their space force. It's new, but they built it using lessons from all their other military branches. How many ships do they have? Not many. By our standards, maybe a few hundred vessels. But each ship seems designed for a different purpose. Some are for fighting, some are for exploring, and some are for carrying supplies. They don't build one type of ship for everything like most species do. Elder Vexmar considered this information. Even if they're clever fighters, a few hundred ships won't make a difference against the Vorthic. We've lost thousands of vessels. That's true, Elder, said Yelena, but there's something else. The humans seem to think about fighting differently than we do. Our scouts observed their military training. They practice fighting when everything goes wrong. They train for situations where their weapons don't work, their ships are damaged, and they're outnumbered. All species do that, said Admiral Kexthara. Not like this. The humans seem to expect everything to go wrong. They plan for failure. And when things do go wrong, they don't panic. They get creative. Another council member spoke up. What do you mean by creative? In one of their historical battles, they were trapped in a city with no way to escape. Instead of surrendering, they used the city itself as a weapon. They made the enemy fight for every building, every street, every room. By the time the enemy won, they had lost so many forces that they couldn't continue their campaign. They sacrificed their own city. Yes, but not their people. Most of the civilians escaped while the enemy was busy fighting the soldiers. The humans turned a defeat into a victory by changing what victory meant. Elder Vexmar was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the sounds of battle continued as their fleet fought desperately against the advancing Vorthic. More ships disappeared from their tactical display every few minutes. The risk is enormous, he finally said. If we bring these humans into our territory, we're giving them access to our technology, our worlds, our secrets. What if they decide we're their next target? With respect, Elder, said Admiral Kexthara, if we don't try something new, there won't be any territory left to worry about. As if to prove his point, a massive explosion lit up the viewing screen. One of their largest battleships, the Radiant Dawn, broke apart under Vorthic bio-cannon fire. 3,000 Zephyrian lives ended in an instant. Send the message, said Elder Vexmar. Offer them standard mercenary rates and territorial concessions if they help us defeat the Vorthic. But make it clear that this is a business arrangement. We're hiring them, not making them our allies. What should we tell them about the enemy? Asked Yelena. Everything. If they're as clever as you think, they'll want to know exactly what they're fighting. As Yelena prepared the message, Admiral Kexthara looked out at the dying stars where Vorthic battleships continued their relentless advance. He wondered if they were making a terrible mistake. The humans sounded almost as dangerous as the Vorthic, just in a different way. But as another ship exploded on the viewing screen, he realized they had no choice. Sometimes the only way to fight a monster was to find a bigger monster. He just hoped the humans would be fighting for them instead of against them when this was all over. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the command center of the United Earthship Defiance, staring at the strangest message he had ever received. The transmission had arrived through quantum channels that humanity didn't even know existed. The words were in perfect English, but something about the way they were arranged felt wrong, like a computer had translated them too carefully. "Sir, you need to see this," said Commander Lisa Park, his second in command. She was holding a datapad that showed the full alien message. "Command has been going crazy trying to figure out if this is real or some kind of test." Morrison read the message again. It was a formal request for military assistance from something called the Zephyrian Republic. They were offering technology, territory, and payment in exchange for help fighting an enemy called the Vorthak Empire. The whole thing sounded like science fiction, except for one detail that made it feel real: the desperation in the words. "How long ago did this arrive?" Morrison asked. 18 hours ago. Earth Command has been in emergency session ever since. They want to know if we're ready for first contact." Morrison looked around the bridge of the Defiance. His crew was busy with their normal duties, checking systems and running practice drills. They had no idea that everything was about to change. The ship was humanity's newest and most advanced vessel, built using lessons learned from 3 centuries of warfare. On Earth, "What does Command want us to do?" he asked. "They want us to make contact." The aliens suggested meeting in neutral space, somewhere between their territory and ours. "They're sending coordinates." Morrison felt a mix of excitement and worry. Humanity had been reaching for the stars for decades, hoping to find other intelligent life. Now that life had found them first, and it was asking for help in a war. "Get me Admiral Roberts on the Quantum Com," Morrison ordered. "I want to hear this directly from Earth Command." The conversation with Earth took several minutes because of the distance. Admiral Roberts appeared on the screen, looking tired but determined. Behind him, Morrison could see other military officers moving back and forth, clearly dealing with the biggest decision in human history. "Captain Morrison," Roberts said, "I'm sure you've read the alien message. This is real. We've confirmed. The quantum signature is genuine and beyond our current technology. These aliens are more advanced than us, and they're asking for military help." "What do we know about this war they're fighting?" Morrison asked. "Very little. They mention an enemy called the Vorthak that consumes everything in its path. The aliens, who call themselves Zephyrians, claim to have lost most of their fleet. They're desperate." Morrison thought about this. "Admiral, why would advanced aliens ask primitive humans for help? It doesn't make sense." Roberts smiled grimly. "That's exactly what we wondered. But after thinking about it, we have a theory. Maybe being primitive is exactly what they need." "Explain." "Think about it, Captain. We've spent our entire history fighting each other. We've developed tactics and strategies that no peaceful alien civilization would ever think of. We know how to fight dirty, how to improvise, how to win when everything goes wrong." Morrison nodded slowly. It made sense in a twisted way. While other species might have evolved past warfare, humans had perfected it. Every conflict on Earth had taught them new ways to fight, new ways to survive, new ways to win against impossible odds. "What are my orders, Admiral?" "Make contact, negotiate. Find out what we're really dealing with. But Captain, remember that this could be the most important mission in human history. How we handle this first contact could determine humanity's place in the galaxy." The meeting was arranged for a location in deep space, far from any inhabited system. The Zephyrian ship arrived first, a graceful vessel that looked more like a crystal sculpture than a military craft. It was beautiful in a way that human ships were not, all smooth curves and flowing lines. The U.S. Defiance looked brutal by comparison. It was built like a weapon, with heavy armor plating and weapon systems visible on every surface. Where the alien ship was art, the human ship was function. Morrison and a small team transported over to the Zephyrian vessel for the face-to-face meeting. The first thing he noticed was how clean everything was. The corridors were spotless, the walls were smooth, and everything glowed with a soft, pleasant light. Admiral Kexthara was waiting in what appeared to be a conference room. Morrison had seen pictures from the first transmission, but seeing the alien in person was different. Kexthara was tall and thin, with skin that looked like it was made of living crystal. His eyes were large and compound, like an insect's, but they showed intelligence and worry. "Captain Morrison," Kexthara said, his voice coming through a translation. "Device, thank you for coming. I know this must seem strange to your people." "It's certainly unexpected," Morrison replied. "We've been hoping to meet other intelligent species for a long time. We just didn't expect the first meeting to be about war." Kexthara's expression became sadder. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. But the Vorthik give us no choice. They consume everything in their path. Planets, ships, entire civilizations. They've been advancing through our territory for months, and we can't stop them." Morrison sat down at the conference table. "Tell me about these Vorthik. What makes them so dangerous?" "They're not like us," Kexthara explained. "They don't build ships, they grow them. Living creatures the size of your cities that can heal damage by eating destroyed vessels. Every weapon we use against them, they adapt to. Our plasma cannons worked for one battle, then they became useless. How many of them are there? Thousands of bioships, maybe tens of thousands. They reproduce by consuming matter and energy. The more they destroy, the stronger they become." Morrison felt a chill. An enemy that grew stronger by winning was every military commander's nightmare. What about their tactics? How do they fight? They don't really fight in the way you might understand. They swarm, they surround their targets and consume them. There's no strategy, no planning, just hunger. This was interesting. Morrison had spent years studying military history, and he knew that predictable enemies were vulnerable enemies. If the Vorthik always fought the same way, there might be a way to use that against them. "Admiral Kexthara," Morrison said, "I need to ask you something directly. Why did you contact us? Your technology is clearly more advanced than ours. Your ships are faster, your weapons are more powerful. What could humans possibly offer that you don't already have?" Kexthara was quiet for a moment. "We've been watching your species for some time. What we've seen is unusual. Most intelligent species develop beyond warfare as they advance. They become peaceful, civilized. But humans are different." "How so?" "You still fight each other. Not just for resources or territory, but for ideas, for beliefs, for things that have no physical value. This seemed primitive to us at first, but now we wonder if it might be exactly what we need." Morrison understood. "You think our experience with warfare gives us an advantage?" "Yes, we've been fighting the Vorthik using standard military doctrine. Formation fighting, coordinated attacks, defensive positions. But the Vorthik don't follow standard military doctrine. They just consume. Maybe we need someone who thinks about fighting differently." Morrison looked at his team. They were all experienced soldiers who had seen combat in various conflicts on Earth. Each of them had learned to think creatively, to adapt, to find solutions when the normal rules didn't apply. "What exactly are you asking us to do?" Morrison said, "Help us fight the Vorthik. We'll provide you with advanced technology, star charts, and territorial concessions. In return, you help us stop the invasion. How many ships do you want us to bring?" Morrison smiled, and something in his expression made Kexthara uncomfortable. "Just one? One ship?" "Captain, the Vorthik have thousands of vessels. One human ship, however advanced, cannot make a difference." "Admiral," Morrison said, "you said yourself that standard military doctrine hasn't worked against the Vorthik. Maybe what you need isn't more ships. Maybe what you need is a different way of thinking about the problem." Kexthara studied the human captain. There was something in Morrison's eyes that reminded him of predators from his homeworld. Not evil, but dangerous. Focused, ready to hunt. Very well, Kexthara said. One ship, but I want to understand what you're planning. Morrison stood up. We're not planning anything yet. First, we need to see the enemy. We need to understand how they fight, how they think, how they react. Then we'll figure out how to kill them. The casual way Morrison said kill them made Kexthara's skin change color slightly. Most civilized species talked about defeating. Enemies are stopping them. Humans, apparently, were more direct. When can you begin? Kexthara asked. We'll need a few days to prepare. We'll want to study your intelligence reports, examine any Vorthic technology you've captured, and understand the tactical situation. Then we'll engage. As the meeting ended and the humans prepared to return to their ship, Kexthara wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. The humans seemed almost as dangerous as the Vorthak, just in a different way. But as reports came in of another star system falling to the Vorthak advance, he realized they had no choice. Sometimes the only way to fight monsters was to hire bigger monsters. The Vorthak fleet moved through space like a swarm of hungry locusts. General Zaxkol guided his bioships through the void, their living hulls pulsing with consumed energy. Each vessel was a creature that had evolved for one purpose: to eat and grow stronger. The general's command ship was the largest of the swarm, a creature nearly 10 kilometers long that had been feeding for over a century. Its mind was connected to every other ship in the fleet through psychic links that allowed perfect coordination. When one ship learned something new, they all learned it instantly. Forward scouts report enemy fleet ahead, came the mental voice of one of his sub-commanders. Zephyrian vessels in defensive formation around the fourth planet. General Zaxkol tasted the information through his neural connection. The Zephyrians were predictable as always. They would form a defensive line, fire their energy weapons, until the bioships adapted, then retreat to the next system. It had been the same pattern for months. Standard approach, he commanded through the psychic link. Surround and consume. Let them waste their energy on our forward scouts while the main fleet moves into position. The Vorthak had fought hundreds of species over the millennia. They had consumed entire civilizations, absorbed their technology, and grown stronger with each victory. Every enemy eventually fell to the same tactic: overwhelming numbers and adaptive biology. But as the bioships approached the Kepler 442 system, something felt different. The psychic scouts reported unusual readings. There was a new ship among the Zephyrian fleet, something they had never encountered before. Unknown vessel detected, reported Scout Commander Victor. Single craft, primitive design, but the energy signatures are ... strange. General Zaxkol examined the readings through the psychic link. The ship was much smaller than the Zephyrian vessels, built with crude metals and simple energy systems. But there was something about its configuration that didn't make sense. It looked like it was designed for fighting rather than exploring or transporting. Probably another desperate ally, he decided. The Zephyrians have been calling for help from primitive species. It changes nothing. Proceed with the attack. On the bridge of the UE Sophians, Captain Morrison watched the approaching Vorthak fleet through the tactical display. The bioships moved in perfect formation, like a single organism spreading across space. Each vessel pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to communicate with the others. Incredible, said Lieutenant Commander Alex Ching from the weapons station. I count over 800 vessels, and they're all coordinating without any detectable radio signals. They're using some kind of psychic communication, Morrison replied. Admiral Kexthara briefed us on it. They share information instantly across the entire fleet. Commander Lisa Park studied the enemy formation. Sir, they're not approaching like any human fleet would. No advanced scouts, no flanking maneuvers. They're just coming straight at us. That's because they don't think like us. Morrison said. They're not trying to outmaneuver the enemy. They're trying to overwhelm them. The tactical display showed the Zephyrian fleet arranging itself in a traditional defensive formation. Their crystal ships gleamed as they charged their energy weapons, preparing to meet the Vorthik advance with coordinated fire. "Captain," called Communications Officer Betty Walsh, "Admiral Kexthara is requesting we take position in the defensive line." Morrison smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Tell the Admiral that we appreciate the suggestion, but we'll be using our own tactics." "Sir, what are our orders?" asked Alex Chun. "All hands battle stations," Morrison announced over the ship's intercom. "This is what we trained for. The enemy thinks they know how space combat works. Let's show them they're wrong." The crew of the Defiance moved with practiced efficiency, unlike the Zephyrian vessels, which were designed for long-range energy combat. The human ship was built for close-quarters fighting. Its armor was thick and angled to deflect incoming fire. Its weapons were designed for maximum damage at short range, but more importantly, its crew was trained for chaos. "Range to target?" Morrison asked. 60,000 kilometers and closing," reported Chen. "Enemy fleet is maintaining formation." The Vorthik bioships approached in their usual swarm pattern, expecting the defenders to open fire at maximum range. It was the same tactic that had worked against dozens of species. Let the enemy waste their energy on long-range shots while the bioships closed the distance. "Sir," called Walsh from Communications, "we're receiving a transmission from the Vorthok fleet. Put it through." The voice that came through the speakers was unlike anything the human crew had heard before. It was a mixture of clicking sounds and mental pressure that seemed to bypass the ears and speak directly to the brain. "Unknown vessel, you are in the path of the Vorthek swarm. Surrender now and your consumption will be swift. Resist and you will be absorbed slowly." Morrison looked around the bridge at his crew. They were all experienced soldiers who had seen combat in various conflicts on Earth. Each of them wore the same expression, grim determination mixed with anticipation. "Communications, send them our response," Morrison ordered. "What should I?" "Tell them, sir." Morrison's grin was predatory. "Send them the package Lisa prepared." The transmission that reached the Vorthak fleet was unlike anything in their collective memory. Instead of surrender or defiance, it was a recording of human voices raised in something that sounded like a war cry. The audio was layered with music that seemed to pulse with barely contained violence. The sound spoke of conflict and victory in ways that made even the Vorthok pause. There was joy in the voices, as if the humans were looking forward to the coming battle. The music had a rhythm that seemed designed to synchronize with combat movements. "What is this?" General Zaxkol asked through the psychic link. "Unknown." "General, it appears to be some form of psychological warfare. The transmission contains audio patterns that seem designed to intimidate, but the Vorthik were not easily intimidated. They had consumed civilizations that had tried every form of psychological warfare imaginable. They began to dismiss the human transmission as primitive. Bravado. Then, the U.S. Defiance opened fire. The first salvo came from weapons the Vorthik had never seen before. Instead of energy beams, the human ship launched solid projectiles that moved at incredible speed. The kinetic weapons tore through the bioship's adaptive armor before they could adjust to the new threat. "Impossible," General Zaxkol declared. "They're using primitive kinetic weapons. Those should be useless against our armor." But the projectiles weren't just chunks of metal. They were sophisticated weapons designed by a species that had spent centuries perfecting the art of destruction. Each round was designed to penetrate armor and cause maximum internal damage. The Vorthik bioships began to adapt, their living hulls shifting to better deflect the kinetic rounds. But before they could complete the adaptation, the human ship switched to energy weapons. Laser beams lanced out from the Defiance, targeting the areas where the bioships had weakened their armor to defend against kinetic weapons. "They're switching weapon types," reported a Vorthek sub-commander. "Our ships can't adapt fast enough." This was something the Vorthek had never encountered. Most species used one type of weapon system and stuck with it. The humans seemed to be using multiple weapon types simultaneously, switching between them to prevent adaptation. But what truly confused the Vorthek was the human ship's movement. Instead of maintaining a safe distance like the Zephyrian vessels, the Defiance was accelerating directly toward the biofleet. "They're charging our formation," reported Scout Commander Vector. "This makes no tactical sense." General Zaxkol studied the human ship through this psychic link. Its crew was behaving in ways that defied conventional military logic. They weren't trying to preserve their vessel or maintain tactical advantage. They were acting like predators closing in for a kill. "All ships, focus fire on the human vessel," he commanded. "Destroy it before it reaches our formation." Hundreds of bioweapons turned toward the Defiance. Energy beams and bioplasma bursts filled the space around the human ship. But the vessel seemed to dance between the attacks, using maneuvers that no sane pilot would attempt. On the bridge of the Defiance, the crew worked with mechanical precision, even as the ship shook from near misses. Warning lights flashed and alarms sounded, but no one seemed concerned. They had trained for this kind of chaos. "Armor holding," reported the damage control officer. "Minor hits to sections 7 and 12, but all systems are functional." "Distance to target?" Morrison asked. 30,000 kilometers in closing, Chun replied. "We're almost in optimal firing range." The Vorthek bioships tried to adapt to the human tactics, but the Defiance kept changing its approach. When they adjusted for the ship's speed, it changed direction. When they predicted its course, it did something unexpected. The human vessel wasn't following any tactical doctrine the Vorthek had ever seen. It was improvising, adapting, thinking in ways that the collective consciousness of the biofleet couldn't predict. "General," called Sub-Commander Yilthek, "the human ship is not behaving according to any known combat protocols. Its movements appear random, but they're avoiding our weapons with unusual efficiency." The used Defiance tore through the Vorthek formation like a bullet through paper. Captain Morrison watched the tactical display as his ship carved a path of destruction through bioships that had never faced an enemy like this before. "Target their command vessel," Morrison ordered, pointing at the massive creature that pulsed at the center of the enemy fleet. "I want to have a conversation with whoever's running this show." The Defiance's weapon systems had been designed by engineers who understood one simple truth. Sometimes you needed to break things that didn't want to be broken. The ship carried kinetic cannons that fired depleted uranium rounds at incredible speeds, plasma batteries that could melt through any known armor, and missile systems loaded with warheads designed to cause maximum internal damage. But it wasn't just the weapons that made the human ship deadly. It was how the crew used them. Switching to armor-piercing rounds, called Alex Cheen from the weapons station. Targeting bioship locomotion systems. The Vorthek had never faced an enemy that targeted specific ship systems. Most species simply fired at the largest part of an enemy vessel, hoping to cause enough damage to disable it. But humans had spent centuries learning exactly where to hit things to make them stop working. "General," Zaxkol felt pain lance through the psychic network as another of his bioships died. The human vessel was targeting nerve clusters and vital organs with surgical precision. Somehow, these primitive aliens understood bioship anatomy better than species that had been fighting the Vorthek for decades. "How are they doing this?" he demanded through the mental link. "They've never seen our ships before, but they're hitting us exactly where we're most vulnerable." "Unknown, General," replied Scout Commander Vector. "Their targeting systems seem to be analyzing our bioships in real time and identifying weak points." What the Vorthek didn't understand was that humans had been studying alien biology since the first contact with the Zephyrians. The crew of the Defiance included xenobiologists who had spent days examining captured Vorthek tissue samples. They knew exactly how the bioships worked, and more importantly, they knew how to break them. The human ship rolled to avoid a cluster of bioplasma bursts, its hull armor deflecting energy beams that would have destroyed any other vessel. But the Defiance had been built by a species that expected to be shot at. Every surface was angled to redirect incoming fire, and the armor was designed to absorb and disperse energy rather than simply resist it. Hull breach in Section 12, reported Damage Control Officer Danny Torres. Sealing now. Minor casualties, but all systems remain operational. Morrison nodded. The crew had trained for this kind of damage. Unlike most species, humans expected their ships to be hurt in battle. They planned for it, prepared for it, and kept fighting even when their vessel was falling apart around them. A Vorthek boarding pod slammed into the Defiance's hull, its biomechanical drills cutting through the armor plating. Inside the pod, Vorthek warriors prepared to swarm into the human ship and consume its crew from within. The airlock opened, and the first Vorthek soldier stepped into the corridor. It was a nightmare creature, part insect and part machine, with claws designed for tearing through metal, and feeding tubes that could drain the life from any living thing. It lasted exactly 3 seconds. The human security team was waiting with weapons that had been specifically designed for close-quarters combat against unknown alien biology. The Vorthek warrior died before it fully understood what it was facing. Boarding party neutralized, reported Security Chief Maria Gonzalez over the intercom. Sealing the breach now, but more boarding pods were incoming. The Vorthek had decided that if they couldn't destroy the human ship from outside, they would consume it from within. They made a fatal mistake in that assumption. The corridors of the Defiance became a nightmare for the invading Vorthek. The ship had been designed for internal fighting, with defensive positions built into every section. The human crew moved through their own vessel like they owned it, using passages and maintenance tunnels that the aliens couldn't access. More importantly, the humans fought like they enjoyed it. "Contact in Section 7, came a voice over the intercom. 5 hostiles, engaging now. The sounds that followed made General Zaxkull's bioship shudder. Through the psychic link, he could feel the terror and confusion of his warriors as they died in the human ship's corridors. These weren't just soldiers defending their vessel. These were predators who had turned their own ship into a hunting ground. Boarding teams report heavy resistance, Sub-Commander Yilthek informed him. The humans are not fighting defensively. They're hunting our forces through their own ship. This was impossible. Every species the Vorthek had encountered treated boarding actions as disasters to be contained. They would seal off sections and try to prevent the invaders from spreading. But the humans seemed to be actively seeking out the Vorthek warriors, tracking them down and eliminating them with systematic efficiency. On the bridge of the Defiance, Morrison listened to the reports from his security teams with satisfaction. His crew wasn't just repelling boarders. They were studying them, learning their weaknesses, and sharing that information across the ship in real time. "Hostile biology confirmed," reported Dr. Karen Wright, the ship's xenobiologist. "Weak points identified and transmitted to all security teams. These things die if you hit them in the nerve cluster behind their primary feeding appendage." The human crew adapted to fighting the Vorthek warriors faster than the aliens could adapt to being fought. Within minutes, every security team on the ship knew exactly how to kill the invaders most efficiently. But the real shock came when the humans went on the offensive. Instead of simply defending their ship, human boarding parties began launching their own attacks on nearby Vorthek vessels. They used the same boarding pods that had brought the aliens to their ship, turning the enemy's own tactics against them. General Zaxkull watched in horror as his bioships began reporting internal fighting. Human soldiers were moving through his vessels with the same systematic efficiency they had shown on their own ship, but they weren't just killing his crews. They were sabotaging vital systems, destroying nerve centers, and crippling his ships from within. "This is impossible," he declared. "No species has ever successfully boarded our bioships. The internal defenses should kill any intruder instantly." "The humans appear to have studied our biology extensively," reported Vector. "They know exactly which systems to target. They're destroying our ships from the inside out." The Vorthak bioships began to convulse and die as human sabotage teams destroyed their central nervous systems. Creatures that had lived for centuries were dying in minutes, their own bodies turned against them by soldiers who understood exactly how to cause maximum damage. But it wasn't just the tactical efficiency that terrified the Vorthak. It was the way the humans fought. Most species treated warfare as a grim necessity, something to be endured and finished as quickly as possible. But the humans seemed to be enjoying themselves. Their communications were full of laughter, challenges, and what sounded like competitive scoring systems for enemy kills. "Security Team 3 reports 15 confirmed kills," came one transmission. "We're still ahead of Team 2. "Copy that, Team 3, came the reply. "Team 2 is moving to Sector 4. Let's see if you can keep up." They were treating the battle like a game, competing with each other to see who could be most effective at killing Vorthak warriors. The aliens had never encountered anything like it. General Zaxko felt something he had never experienced before: fear. Not just tactical concern or strategic worry, but deep, primal terror. The humans weren't just winning. They were having fun doing it. "All ships, tactical withdrawal," he commanded through the psychic link. "Fall back to the outer system and regroup." But the humans weren't finished with them. As the Vorthak fleet began to retreat, the U's Defiance gave chase. The human ship, battered but still functional, pursued the fleeing bioships like a predator following wounded prey. "Sir," asked Commander Park, "should we let them go?" Morrison's smile was cold. "They came here to consume everything in this system. They threatened our new allies. They tried to board our ship." He paused, watching as another Vorthak vessel exploded under the Defiance's guns. "I think we need to send a message to the rest of their fleet." The pursuit continued for hours. Every time the Vorthak tried to regroup, the human ship appeared as if from nowhere, striking hard and fast before vanishing back into the void. The bioships that had terrorized dozens of civilizations found themselves being hunted by a single vessel and its crew of apex predators. Admiral Kexthara watched the battle from his command ship in stunned silence. His species had been fighting the Vorthak for months, using every advantage of technology and numbers. The humans had broken the enemy fleet with one ship and seemed to be treating the whole affair as recreational activity. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from Captain Morrison." The human appeared on screen, his uniform torn and stained with various alien fluids. Behind him, his crew moved with the same casual efficiency, some of them actually singing while they worked. "Admiral Kexthara," Morrison said, his voice carrying a satisfaction that made the alien's skin crawl. The pursuit lasted 3 days across 2 star systems. The U.S. Defiance, battered but still hunting, followed the fleeing Vorthak fleet like a wolf chasing wounded deer. Every time the bioships tried to stop and regroup, the human vessel appeared from the darkness of space, striking fast and hard before disappearing again. General Zaxko had never experienced anything like it. His fleet, which had consumed entire civilizations, was being systematically destroyed by a single enemy ship. The worst part was not knowing where the next attack would come from. "Status report," he demanded through the psychic link, his mental voice tight with fear. "We've lost over half our fleet," replied Sub-Commander Yilthak. "The remaining ships are damaged and demoralized." The crews are requesting permission to scatter and return to home territory individually. Denied, Zaxcall responded immediately. If we separate, the humans will hunt us down one by one. We stay together and make for the hyperspace jump point. But even as he gave the order, Zaxcall knew it might be too late. The human ship had been picking off stragglers for hours, using tactics that no civilized species would consider. They targeted wounded vessels first, showing no mercy for ships that couldn't fight back. They attacked during regeneration cycles when the bioships were most vulnerable. They even used the wreckage of destroyed vessels as cover for their next assault. It was, General Zaxcall realized with growing horror, the behavior of a true predator. The bridge of the Defiance, Captain Morrison studied the tactical display with satisfaction. His crew had been working around the clock for 3 days, but their morale had never been higher. They had taken on an enemy that had terrified the galaxy and beaten them so thoroughly that the survivors were fleeing in panic. "Sir," reported Alex Chun from the weapons station, "the Vorthik fleet is approaching the edge of the system. If they reach the hyperspace jump point, some of them might escape." Morrison nodded. "How many ships do they have left?" "Roughly 300, down from over 800 when we started. Most of the survivors are damaged." Commander Lisa Park looked up from her station. "Captain, we've been fighting for 3 days straight. The ship has taken significant damage and the crew is exhausted. Maybe we should let the rest of them go." Morrison considered this. The logical thing would be to declare victory and return to base. They had accomplished more than anyone thought possible, breaking a fleet that had conquered dozens of worlds. But something in Morrison's expression suggested he wasn't thinking logically. "Communications," he called to Betty Walsh. "Open a channel to the Vorthik fleet." "Channel open, sir." Morrison's voice carried across space to the fleeing bioships, translated by systems that had learned to interpret human speech patterns over the past 3 days. When General Zaxcall heard the message, he felt his bioship shudder with involuntary fear. "General Zaxcall," Morrison said, his tone casual but somehow threatening. "This is Captain Morrison of the U.S. Defiance. I wanted to have a conversation before you leave our territory." Through the psychic link, Zaxcall could feel the terror of his remaining crews. The human voice had become associated with death and destruction. Just hearing it made his warriors want to flee. "What do you want, human?" Zaxcall replied, trying to keep his mental voice steady. "I want to make sure you understand something," Morrison said. "You came here to consume everything in this system. You were going to eat planets, destroy civilizations, and move on to the next target. But that's not going to happen anymore." "We are withdrawing from this sector," Zaxcall responded. "The territory is yours. It's not about territory, General. It's about the message." Morrison paused, and when he continued, his voice carried a weight that made every Vorthik in the Madakamaz Adadwarit fleet want to hide. "You see, we humans have a saying, if you come at the king, you better not miss. You came at our friends. You threatened people under our protection, and you missed." The human captain's words sent waves of fear through the Vorthik psychic network. These weren't the measured tones of a civilized military officer. This was the voice of something that enjoyed hunting. "What happens now is that you go back to your home territory," Morrison continued. "And you tell every Vorthik in your empire exactly what you learned here. You tell them about the humans. You tell them that we're not like the other species you've fought. What are you?" Zaxcall asked, the question coming out before he could stop it. Morrison's laugh was cold. "We're the thing that nightmares fear, General. We're the monsters that other monsters tell scary stories about. And we're very good at our job." The transmission ended, leaving the Vorthek fleet in terrified silence. General Zaxcall gave the order to jump to hyperspace, and within minutes, the surviving bioships disappeared into the void, carrying with them a new understanding of their place in the galactic food chain. Admiral Kexthara arrived at the human position several hours later with a small escort fleet. The used Defiance was floating in space surrounded by the wreckage of hundreds of Vorthik bioships. The debris field stretched for millions of kilometers, testament to the most devastating defeat in Vorthik history. Captain Morrison, Kexthara said as his shuttle approached the human vessel, "May I come aboard? I would like to thank you personally for what you've done." The meeting took place in the Defiance's conference room, which still showed signs of the recent battle. Scorch marks on the walls, replacement panels that didn't quite match the original, and a faint smell of ozone from overloaded electrical systems. Morrison looked tired but satisfied. His uniform was stained and torn, and he had a bandage on his left arm where shrapnel had caught him during one of the boarding actions, but his eyes were alert and focused. "Admiral," Morrison said, "the Vorthik threat to this sector has been neutralized. They won't be back anytime soon." "I still don't understand how you did it," Kexthara admitted. "One ship against their entire fleet. It should have been impossible." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "You keep thinking about this as ship against ship, technology against technology. But that's not what this was about. Then what was it about?" "Psychology," Morrison replied. "The Vorthik are used to fighting civilized species. They expect their enemies to behave in predictable ways. Form defensive lines, coordinate attacks, try to minimize casualties. But humans don't fight that way." Kexthara's crystalline features reflected his confusion. "How do humans fight?" "We fight to win," Morrison said simply. "Not to minimize losses, not to preserve resources, not to maintain honor. We fight to completely destroy our enemy's ability and will to continue fighting. But that's brutal." Morrison's smile was grim. "Admiral, do you know how many wars humans have fought against each other? Thousands. Do you know what we learned from all those wars? That being civilized doesn't help you win. Being efficient does." Kexthara considered this. "Is that why your crew seemed to enjoy the battle?" "Partly. But also because we're very good at it. Humans take pride in being excellent at difficult things. And warfare is one of the most difficult things there is." The alien admiral was quiet. For a moment. "Captain, what you've accomplished here will change the balance of power in this part of the galaxy. The Vorthik have been unstoppable for decades. Now they're fleeing in terror from a single human ship." "That was the point," Morrison replied. "Fear is a weapon, Admiral. The Vorthik spent centuries making other species afraid of them. Now they know what it feels like to be afraid. But what about the future? Will humans continue to help us if the Vorthik return?" Morrison stood up and walked to the viewport, looking out at the debris field that had once been a mighty invasion fleet. "The Vorthik won't return, Admiral. They're going to go back to their territory and tell everyone about what happened here. They're going to spread the word that there's a new predator in the galaxy. And what word is that?" Morrison turned back to face the alien admiral, and Kexthara saw something in the human's eyes that made him deeply uncomfortable. It wasn't cruelty or evil. It was the calm confidence of something that knew exactly how dangerous it was. "That humans protect what's ours," Morrison said. "And once we decide you're ours, we'll fight anyone or anything that threatens you. The Vorthik learned that lesson. So will anyone else who tries to harm our friends." Kexthara left the human ship with a new understanding of the species they had hired as mercenaries. The humans weren't just effective soldiers. They were apex predators who had somehow learned to care about things other than themselves. As the Zephyrian vessels departed, Morrison stood on his bridge and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the surviving Vorthik were spreading word of their defeat. Other species would hear about the humans and wonder what they were. Morrison hoped they would remember the most important lesson. Humans were monsters, but they were monsters who chose their targets carefully. They were the nightmare that protected. dreams, the darkness that guarded the light, and in a galaxy full of hungry things, sometimes the only way to preserve civilization was to be the most dangerous thing in the dark. The U.E.S. Defiance turned toward home, carrying with it the knowledge that humanity had found its place among the stars. They were no longer the primitive species struggling to reach space. They were the thing that other species called when monsters came knocking. And they were very, very good at their job.